Wim. With that, we'll get things rolling. Thank everyone for coming to join this evening. People in the Central Time Zone, I know it's a little later for y'all, but I appreciate you taking the time. So my presentation is entitled Use of UAV Imagery for Cotton Variety Assessment. So here's a quick overview of what we'll be talking about. Pretty much follows a pretty standard format for these types of presentations. So getting into the introduction, the study scope. So commercial agriculture. Commercial agriculture is something that is necessary to our modern lives. It provides us biological products such as food and also things such as fiber that we make many types of materials out of. And something that farmers have literally had to cope with since biblical times is understanding field and crop variability, understanding where differences happen in the field, different soil conditions, moisture conditions, how crops respond to those variables in the field. And that leads to a lot of variety trials within agriculture. Different varieties perform differently on various soils, and so it's very important to make sure correct varieties are identified and selected and brought to a commercial realm. And so that's what we'll be looking at, is a lot of 13 different varieties that were grown in Marana, Arizona. But what's helped farmers in recent years is the emerging field of precision agriculture. And this really came about with the advent of GPS technology. Being able to accurately spatially define a field and accurately map it and map that variability has been very beneficial to farmers. And one tool that has been increasingly beneficial in recent years is a drone. And so drones are, we'll get into that, but they do provide a lot of, it's a very effective tool to cover large areas of land that is very difficult to do manually. So this whole study takes place on the Double D Farm Partnership in Marana, Arizona. It's Mr. and Mrs. Dean. You can see the field there. It's approximately 12 acres. It's a flood irrigation field, so it enters through the concrete. The water would enter through the concrete furrow here at the top and then flood down south through the field. These earthen berms are there to kind of divide the field up and create areas that the water can sort of divide itself and spread across the field. And here are the plots, the 13 plots that are along the length of the field. They're each about 6 rows long, or 6 rows wide. So the objectives of this study is to examine how a UAV with a visual spectrum camera can be used to count seedlings, examine how multi-angle digital photography can be used to develop canopy height models. Then we're going to look at validating and interpreting those results against traditional, more field-based survey techniques. And then also, lastly, examine the relationships among the individual varieties and then also to the harvested yield. So here's a quick, well, there's a long flow chart of the process to create the population estimates. And really the things to focus on here are the orthomosaic image or orthorectified image, then the classified images. So here's a snapshot of what that field looked like on that first day in early May of last year. That's just when the plants are starting to come up. And here you can see them in that cotyledon stage. So just kind of those first 2 leaves are popping up, and that's really what that's the time that we're trying to get accurate counts of these plants. So some in-field collection, we had to do some in-field collection as well to then compare the imagery-based data from. That's Dr. Wilhelm van Leeuwen on either side of that slide. There he's holding a differential GPS unit, and that's used in the field to correct, during the post-processing stage, correct the imagery to a more accurate place. And there he is on the right, getting ready to take off, or getting ready to send the drone off, I guess, to take photos. That goofy guy in the center there, that's me, taking the infield counts to compare, and then also the heights of the plants. Okay, so here's a little bit on the orthomosaic. There's the flight information there. You can see our spatial resolution was very small, half a centimeter. That was to make sure that the individual plants, we were able to see gaps in between the individual plants. And so the orthomosaic process, as the drone is going across the field, it's snapping these photos, and they overlap about 70%. And what that does is that overlap allows for minimization of the distortion in individual pictures. And so what you're left with, or what's created, is an orthomosaic image, and that allows for accurate measurement across a large area. And so once that was created, the image had to be classified. And so based on the values in the pixels, these pixels were classified into 3 categories: plant, shadow, and bare ground, as you can see there. You can see a couple really small false positives, but here and here. And this could be, you know, something like residue from a plant or just a pixel that was misclassified. And so the beauty of commercial agriculture is things are usually planted in rows. So I was able to create a buffer to select only those groups of pixels within that buffer, within that row. And then points were created for individual plants. Then the canopy height model, so measuring the height of the plants. A lot of the infield data collection was similar. The only thing different is instead of an orthomosaic, digital elevation models and digital terrain models were created. And so that gives height and elevation data to the ground and to the images. And here's a quick snapshot of what they looked like, the 3 different canopy heights at the times of imagery collection. And so this process of creating a 3D model from 2D images is called structure from motion. You can see the spatial resolution was a little bit higher here because we really weren't looking for very detailed, still pretty small, 1 centimeter, but twice the size as the other one. But here's a snapshot, and what these blue squares are kind of the focal point, or sort of the I guess the frame that each picture was taken. And so you can see the nadir images, those are looking straight down, these flat pictures. And then these oblique images, they're taken at 30 degrees, looking north and south down the rows. And from that, we were able to then create 3D models. And that's done through point clouds. So you have these dots that are, here's a pretty good example. You can see where they're separated. These dots across the photo that are known elevation points, and then the elevations in between are interpolated, similar to a contour map or something like that. And that's from the beginning, it's from early June. And then here's another example from late July. And here you can start to see that height difference between the berm and the canopy next to it. You can start to see where the 3D model is being built. So for results, looking at accuracy, so here's some image exact accuracy, classification accuracy numbers. Overall, the accuracy of the image was 86.5%, which is fairly good. And for the plant counts, we had an absolute error of right below 11 based on infield to imagery-based plant counts. So when you throw all those dots on the field, this is what you get. Not real helpful. If you zoom in, you can start to see these individual plants, but we'll get into a better analysis here in a second. But here's the estimate. And so from the infield population versus the imagery-based population, there was an absolute difference of right around 14%, which kind of mirrors that image accuracy as well as that 86.5%. So how to make sense of all these little yellow dots? You break it up and you put it into density, right? So each one of these squares represents about 400 square feet within the field. And you can start to see then the population density. So this is plants per acre. You can start to see the differences between the varieties as you look down the field. This is good, but the lows aren't, are they really low, and the highs, are they really high? And so some statistical analysis was completed, known as the Geddes-Ford G-star statistic, also known as a hotspot analysis. And what this does is it shows areas of the field that are statistically significant higher density and areas that are significantly lower density. And you can see that there are a lot of correlations here. But what's interesting here is this area here, if you look, there's a lot of, kind of shows lower population, but in this area, it shows that it's not really significant. So it is lower, but it's not significant in and amongst the other varieties. So getting into the canopy height models. So to understand the height of a plant, first we have to know what the ground elevation is. So this is a digital terrain model, and this is just purely the dirt. So this is showing what the elevations are across that field just by meters and from sea level. And then canopy height models were created over the top, and that's using, again, just taking that same measurement, but then just subtracting the two and getting the difference, and that's showing you the height of the plants. And here you can see that's early July, and here it is in late July. And one thing to look at, just keep an eye on, if you notice 203 and 204 are pretty yellow, so pretty high, and then 212 and 213 are relatively lower. And just keep those numbers in mind as we go forward here. Looking at the results of the canopy height model, the first number there is 11.3 absolute difference centimeters, and then the second, later in July, the absolute difference was 2.9. And that could be due to just a more closed canopy. The image just wasn't, it was easier to read when it's a full canopy versus in the beginning of July that you still have gaps in between rows, you have some gaps in between plants. And so I think that is maybe what led to that greater error in the earlier flight. So looking at it compared to harvest data, looking at canopy height change to estimated population. And here you can see a pretty clear correlation between higher population and a lower height change between that month of July. And again, here, if you notice 203 and 204, those are the ones you could really see clearly in the imagery. That 203 and 204 really showed a high degree of change, and 212 and 213 really didn't. And how does that transfer then to harvested yield? So again, it's pretty significant that a lower height change results in a higher yield, and vice versa. And again, you can see that these two sort of flipped, that you have these varieties with a lower height change produced a higher yield, and the ones with a greater height change produced a lower yield. And this makes sense, right? I mean, a plant only has so many hours to grow. It only has so many hours to take up resources, only so much water. So it really has to decide, or it's genetically programmed one way or the other. So whether that plant decides to put those resources into growing a stem or growing fruiting structures. And that really just sort of emphasizes the point of variety trials in general. So to wrap things up here, we did create a efficient methodology of UAV imagery in precision agriculture. This model could definitely be replicated. And I think it could definitely be honed in as well. Lessons were definitely learned throughout this process. I think that could really hone things in. Population estimates were created for 11 cotton varieties. I had to pull 2 of them out. There was some areas, part of the field that we looked at, there were some areas where the rows were really hard to discern. And so just kind of had taken those out. Again, some lessons were learned. Things could definitely be improved going forward. But the classification accuracy there was 86.5%. Canopy height models were created, and they were used to estimate growth, achieving an best absolute difference of 2.9 centimeters. The results were pretty comparable to field-based techniques. Things were kind of relative to one another. And then we did examine the varieties against one another and also against the harvested fiber yield. So, as all good science cannot be done alone, there's several people here to thank. First of all, Dr. Wilhelm van Leeuwen, and really everybody at the Arizona Remote Sensing Center. They were definitely helping a lot with collecting the imagery and just helping get their expertise and showing me how to use the software and those kinds of things. Ms. Karen Geldmacher with Americot. It was all her varieties in the field, and it was really fun to be out there with her and start to learn a little bit more. And that was really a fun experience to learn more about cotton. Dr. Randy Norton, he's a director at the UA Extension, Safford Agricultural Center. He and Wim helped get this thing up and going, really, and Randy does things all over the state with different cotton growers and is very active with Cooperative Extension. As I think he's on the road on Highway 8 right now, coming home from work, so you know he's a hard worker. And then last, but certainly not least, Mr. and Mrs. Gary and Billy Dean of the Double D Farm Partnership. They were very kind and willing to let us come out there and walk around their fields, and they would always come out and kind of say hi, and real friendly people. And so thanks to everyone there on the screen, and that's it. So thank you, and happy flying if I can get this thing to go here.